Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is projection from the inside out. We talked about projection earlier in the week, but it was more about projections that we might be experiencing from other people or that we might cast on ourselves. And today I want to talk about how our projections out into the world dictate our experience and how we can shift that around based on what we're projecting. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present and settled in. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and organs, and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, or fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, nourishing, lightening, enlightening, enlivening, and invigorating all your molecules, all your electrons, all your cells. And as you exhale any remaining negativity, fatigue, and tension and stress. And now let's just gently press our palms together and really put your attention into your fingertips to feel that amazing sensation as your fingertips rub across your palms, and put your attention into your palms to feel that tickling and that tingling, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to have you here. Good morning, Bernadette, and good morning, Andrea. So good to have you both and everybody else who's joining us. Today we're talking about projection and how really our experience of life is a projection of our inner experience, our inner beliefs and predispositions. So I was talking with a client, and we were talking about how trauma leaves an imprint. And when we grow up in a traumatic environment, we develop behaviors that are designed to protect us, and that ultimately become not so positive. For instance, anger or like defensiveness can be a really effective tool against attack. Good morning, Susan. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about projection. And so we're with trauma, we develop responses, behaviors that help to protect us. And it may be a behavior, for instance, of going numb. It may be a behavior of running. It may be a behavior of attack, counterattack, or defense. And then because we're conditioned in so many ways to that environment of trauma, it becomes a lens through which we see the world. So what we're doing is we're projecting the intention. Bernadette says fight or flight syndrome. Exactly. And what happens is that we then see through that lens of attack because we've been so conditioned to it. And so our response is to go into whatever our pattern is. And it's interesting, the fight or flight syndrome, I've heard it expanded to fight, flight, freeze, feed, and engage in sexual behavior. Those are all ways because I'm not going to say that word here. But those are all ways that we respond to trauma. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here. So the thing is that those pattern behaviors, part of that pattern behavior is a perception or a projection of danger, right? So Bernadette says, oh, I think I'm missing a few steps. I just recently learned of those other responses, but it makes sense. I mean, I've seen it. Certainly a lot of people eat to give themselves comfort, and on and on. So oftentimes the behaviors that we develop as coping mechanisms, or that are really effective in an emergency situation, become embedded as more patterned behavioral responses, and as a result of that, what was originally intended as a protective mechanism becomes something that then is an oppressor. And part of that whole behavioral mechanism is the perception of threat. So in other words, the projection. So if you say something to me and I am projecting that that's an attack, then I'm going to respond in a way that is perhaps inappropriate to that circumstance, right? Where I'm going to be overreactive. And I also might project on you the dynamic that I had experienced in the past that elicited that behavior in the first place. So if I am not being heard, and in other words, sort of not being considered, and kind of having my spirit crushed, my response might be like, why can't you hear me? What's wrong with you? Didn't you hear me when I told you that before? Rather than, oh, that person just was preoccupied or whatever. It's not about me. Instead, I might perceive something as an attack, or as a belittlement, or as a slight, when the intention behind it wasn't as a slight at all. That there was no malicious intent at all behind whatever occurred. And then maybe there wasn't the judgment behind it. There wasn't a negative intent. And yet when we're so conditioned to maybe verbal abuse, for example, then we might be hearing things in someone's speaking that aren't there, things that aren't there in terms of that malicious intent, or yeah. So what I'm talking about is triggers, and part of our triggers are a big part of our triggers are perceptual, or like a perceptual filter that we hear things from. So we're so used to being attacked that we hear things through a filter of attack, for example, and then project this malign intent on the person that was just saying something, to us. And maybe somebody was just distracted in a moment and wasn't paying attention, and it's not about their relationship to you. It's more about what was going on for them, right? So I'm wondering if you've ever noticed that you filter things through certain interpretations that lead to upset, lead to conflict. So there have been people in my life where I had experienced a lot of attack, for instance. Good morning, Dennis. Good to have you here. We're talking about projection and how we project our interpretation or expectation on other people, and then how that influences our interactions and experiences. So when when in the presence of people who have said things that were meant to hurt or to criticize, et cetera, when you grow up in a context of criticism, for example, then that's the filter through which things are heard, whether it's meant that way or not. After a point, right? It's like, okay, I'm receiving an attack. How am I going to respond to that attack? And hearing everything as criticism and taking it very personally, and it propagates this whole cascade of behaviors and reactions. So, because if I then react in a way that where I feel that I've been attacked, I'm going to be defensive, or I'm going to implement whatever my other kinds of behavioral protective devices are. And then that spurs more conflict, right? And so Bernadette says, sometimes it becomes a habitual emotion, which may add to a soul's wound. Exactly, because when we find ourselves kind of falling into an automated response, it's not in alignment with our intentions necessarily. Like so many of us were working on being elevated, on transcending our traumas, on growing past the hurts, becoming whole and being kind and being, all these other intentions that we have in our beingness, to be present, to be responsive rather than reactive, for example. And then what happens is that these triggers become activated, and bam, we're automated. We're robots almost, just going through this cycle of reaction. And it doesn't have much to do with real reality. Yes, our experience is real. Yes, that's our particular reality, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with what the whole picture of what was happening from the other end, for example. Good morning, Grace Isis. I love that. Good morning, Core Connectors. I love it. Thank you so much. It's great to have you here. We're talking about how our experience of the drama and trauma of the world or of our lives is so much a projection, because what happens is when let's say I've been conditioned into a certain reactive pattern where I'm assuming that people are not valuing me. So when somebody says something, I'm going to be hearing it through the filter that people aren't valuing me, and I'm going to react to say, well, what's wrong with you that you're not valuing me or not recognizing me or whatever. Like if I have that defensive kind of protective mechanism. So we can and what happens is that I internalize that whole interaction. And I'm not using me saying this is what happens for me, because it in the past perhaps, but way less so now anyway. There are moments, but for the most part, not so much. But then what happens is that I make up all these stories about what that person's intention was, and how they don't respect me, or how they don't care for me, or how they think badly of me, or how they want to harm me, or whatever it is. I add to the stories of that original drama, and that original trauma. And what it does is serve to reinforce the very, very same filter and pattern, until we can step out of it, until we can say, well, wait a second, maybe it really didn't have anything to do with me, what they were saying or what they were doing. Maybe it wasn't something that was intended to be hurtful to me. And in that possible understanding, maybe I can step away and start uncoiling that whole tangle of emotions and responses. So I'm wondering, how in your life, if you've seen places where you've had these reactivities and you were able to diffuse it, diffuse all that wiring, to unplug it, and what kinds of artful ways did you go about doing that? Good morning, Josie. So good to have you here. So we're talking about projection and how our suffering is largely based on a projection. So what would that look like also? Let's say from another angle, besides just the trauma, we can be projecting, like when we do comparisons, when we compare ourselves to others, when we say, well, or we compare ourselves to an ideal that we fabricated, like I'm projecting that life should be like the Leave It to Beaver, and probably that's way before most of your times, but it was like this family drama that, perfect family kind of thing. And that's how life should be. When we project that, we create suffering for ourselves through comparison, right? To say, first of all, I'm creating this unachievable ideal, and then I'm disappointed and upset because life doesn't happen that way. Or I'm projecting this ideal of, by this point in life, I should have this much money. I should have this kind of circumstance. Life should be a certain way. All of that is a projection. And when we should on ourselves and others, what we're creating is an opportunity for misery. So good morning, Elaine. So wonderful to have you here with us. And Susan, Susan remembers Leave It to Beaver. That's awesome. I love that show too. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so the projection, whether we're projecting intentions on others, or we're projecting these ideals of how things should be, or we're projecting ideals about how we should be. I should be this way. I should have done this. I should have done that. I shouldn't have reacted that way. When we're projecting these ideals and ideas of how things should be, what's actually going on? We're creating a fantasy and then comparing reality to it. Like, who said that's the way things should be? What is this whole idea of things should be a certain way? Things are as they are. We may desire for them to be different, but that doesn't mean that they should be that way. And we don't get to punish ourselves and other people because we have this idea of what should be. So Kay said, hey, Kay, welcome. I don't think I've seen your name here before. Kay says, manifesting the new earth, that is indeed my projection. And so it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we can, I believe too, and thank you for your contrast here is excellent. And we create positive projections too. Like we can meet somebody and we can be projecting, let's say we're enamored of that person, we can be projecting all kinds of wonderful attributes on them. We can also be imagining and manifesting. And I don't know if manifesting is any different from projecting. Maybe it isn't. To bring into being, we can be projecting all kinds of possibility. I think the way that I'm thinking about projection is distinct from manifesting. And I'm all about manifesting the new earth. So I'm right there with you, Kay. And I think that maybe can we make a distinction between projecting and intending? Because I think having clarity of intention is different than a projection of that's not particularly conscious in the context that I'm speaking of anyway. The way that I'm using the word is really like projecting assumptions, I think, is the way that I'm talking about it right now. And I see that as different from intending. And not that I'm right, I'm just saying that in this mess up here, the way that I'm thinking things through is that our intention creates reality. Projection is maybe it's the same. It's just not the same in the way that I'm using it right now. Elaine says, yes, there's a difference between judgments and self-inquiry for growth. Becoming aware of both is part of the awakening. 100%. Thank you for that, Elaine. So for sure, we have judgments. I guess judgments, interpretations, biases. I think projections are things that we often do unconsciously. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. So judgments and self-inquiry, when we're able to identify our judgments, then we have a greater capacity to be free of them. So that's what I'm talking about here is our judgments, our projections, or attributing certain intentions from attributing certain intentions to other people in response to us, for example, this whole complex dynamic. So Kay says, we are indeed co-creators, 100%. Indigo children, light barriers, etc., rise into projecting the new year earth. All is beautiful and in divine order, and so it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I just think that the way you're using projecting is different and in a more elevated way than I'm talking about it today. So for sure, I agree with you 100%. We are co-creators. And one of the ways that we create our experience is through the lenses of our perception. And the lenses of our perception are, in a way, projectors. So perhaps coming from where you're standing, Kay, you're projecting a beautiful, beautiful world and the perfection of everything, and in its divine order. And I'm not here to argue that by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just talking about incidences when we're experiencing drama and trauma, and how we can be attributing motivations to others through that lens of trauma or drama that may not have anything to do with the reality of what just went on, what the dynamic was, for example. So Bernadette says family, tribal, emotional stress. Oh, I love that. That's such a great way to talk about it. Family, tribal, emotional stress is so far from where I am. And it comes with fighting and emotional judgments. I get that. Oh my gosh. So, so, so true. Like the family, tribal, emotional stress. Yes, I think that that's something that is the source of a lot of these dramas and traumas and projections, right? And as we move through, as we evolve, as we manage to heal, the emotional judgments and the fighting hopefully starts shifting. It's so funny, and I don't know that I'm going to quote it perfectly, but you hear, I've heard something to the effect of, if you want to if you think you're enlightened, that's what it is. If you think you're enlightened, just go spend some time with your family. For most people, that's true, because where are our triggers? Our triggers are with our families, right? And that's the tribal emotional stress, or the tribal emotional environment for so many of us, is one where there's all kinds of triggers, and you're just walking around like this raw meat, just like it's very easy in a family environment to be triggered and to go into these automated types of responses. So Elaine says, Kay says, love the word possibilities. Lots of illuminated light to you. Thank you, Kay. Much appreciated. And Elaine says, Ram Dass said, if you think you are so enlightened, go hang out with family. Okay, so I didn't know who it was from, but thank you for that, Elaine. Exactly. If any of us need to be humbled, just go hang out with your family, and it'll take you down a few notches, right? We get to see where we're still triggerable, right? And I think that in the context that I was talking about projection, I think that in family, that's where our projections are most alive, because we think we know someone, so we have certain expectations of how they're going to interact with us. And so the lens through which we perceive something is tempered often by hurt or anger or resentment or judgment, or whatever challenges we've had within the family context. Some of us are fortunate enough to have the experience of trust and love in family, and that's a beautiful thing, and navigate, and maybe all of the above. And that's the challenge of navigating the family constellation, shall we say. So Elaine says, I purposely go around people who have not mastered the habit of judging, and it serves me well, as I can hold love in my heart. So you get to prove to yourself, Elaine, that you are more evolved, and keeping yourself aware. It's awesome. And Kay says personal unconscious projection is indeed different, but once awoken into high vibrations and the power of now, you choose what you project. And I feel we are fulfilling our soul contracts. I agree with you 100%. Kay, that's really what I'm talking about, is bringing our projections to awareness so that then we can elevate them and make conscious choice. That's what it comes down to. That's the source of freedom. And I've realized more and more that for me, it was really interesting in identifying my core values. What my top value was consciousness, and what I recognize is consciousness / awakening. And what I realize is the reason for that, or the reason that that's the highest value, is because in fact, the highest value is freedom for me. And consciousness becomes a path to freedom. And so freedom is one of my, is my highest value. And we can talk about values. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk about values. Anyway, Dennis says, judge not, yes, tongue twister, judge not, lest ye be judged. And that's so true. Because, well, even if we don't judge, it doesn't stop us from being judged. Perhaps it frees us from the bonds of the judgments of others if we're not judgmental, but it doesn't stop others from judging us necessarily. And in any case, this has been a very stimulating conversation, at least for me, and I hope so for you. And I so appreciate this time that we spend together. And I think I'm going to wrap it up for the morning. So I'm Mira Rubin, and this is the Core Connection. And I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please check out the other awesome Enlightened World Network programming, EWN One with the Earth, and Enlightened World Living. So until next time, thank you. Bernadette says, enjoyed. Have a blessed day. And the same to all of you. So much love and appreciation. And until next